Radio. Happy Football Tuesday, Canada. I hope you are well out there wherever you may be listening from. In fact, it could be Friday right now and you're out for a morning jog. And no, I am not losing my mind, despite what some people think. But in actuality, you would be listening to the Rouge Radio podcast. And our fantastic producer here, Jason Sperling, he puts the show together Tuesday and Wednesday, CIS, CJFL, CFL. He combines it into one for your listening pleasure, and you can take that on the go with you wherever you may be traveling to or whatever you may be doing on a specific day. And how do you find the podcast? Well, first, you obviously have to wait until the live shows are complete, and that is today as well as tomorrow on the CFL show. And then next, you, of course, have to allow Jason to cut the audio together. And I mean, come on, give him a break. He does have other things to do. He's a little bit busy, so you do have to wait until Thursday morning for that. But when you do, there are three ways you can get that. And the first, you can go to our website, rougeradio.com. Secondly, you can go to iTunes and download it there. Or third, you can check out YouTube and listen to it from there. And of course, being that it is Tuesday, it is the CIS and CJFL show. And later on this half hour, we're going to have Kent Ridley of Ridley Scouting to talk about the recent change to the CFL draft format. Last week, the CFL Scouting Bureau released their top 15 rankings for May's draft, so I'll ask him his opinion on that, as well as a new formula he has created. He is a CIS top 10 voter, and he's created a new formula for how he votes, and we're going to discuss that. But in the meantime, let's bring in our first guest, and he is here to talk about the CJFL, more specifically, the Ontario Football Conference, and even more specifically, something that happened in Windsor earlier today at a press conference. He is a correspondent to us, a reporter here at Rouge Radio for the Canadian Junior Football League. He is John DeNapoli. And John, thanks for hopping on with us tonight, and how are you doing?
Great, Tyler. Thanks for having me on. Hello to all our listeners worldwide listening tonight.
Now, we have some audio here from the press conference earlier, and we're going to run that in just a couple of seconds here. But first, I want you to just take a second and set up what our listeners are about to hear.
Yeah, like every Tuesday here in Windsor, James Murray, the media coordinator for the Windsor AKO Fratman, hosts a weekly coaches press conference, so the media here in Windsor can ask their questions in a nice forum to Mike Lachance, the head coach, and any players that may be there. And today at the press conference, the president of AKO, Walter Spencer Robinson, and the vice president, John Duquette, were both in attendance, expecting maybe some fireworks to happen, since I happen to be there this week for the first time this year. And there was some allegations to go on in Windsor, and I just wanted to get the scoop and hopefully break the story that isn't being told properly right now in the football community in Windsor.
So this is from earlier today at Windsor's press conference, and you'll hear it here on Rouge Radio.
There's some rumors in the football community here that some powers that be here at the AKO fraternity have given you an ultimatum that if you do not win an OFC championship, that you'll be removed as head football coach here. Can you comment on that?
Well, I mean, there's always talks. I mean, with some new leadership with Walter coming in, there's certainly been talks on where we need to be and what the expectations are, but there's no one in the world that could put higher expectations on me or my football program than me. My expectation is to win every year. If we don't win and the decision's that I'm gone, then I had a good 10-year run, and I'll move on with life. I'm sure my wife will be happy to have me at home. But it really hasn't crossed my mind too much, because I expect to win. And I think my record speaks for itself. I'm 17-5 over the last 3 years. In 10 years or 9 years, I've been to the championship game 4 times. I've been coach of the year twice. I've had player of the year 5 times. And I've had man of the year in the OFC 5 times and man of the year in the CJFL once as players that have contributed to society. So, I mean, I'll put my record up against anybody in the OFC. I think I do a good job. I'm confident myself, and I'm confident in my team this year that we're going to win. So I don't think that team's going to come into play.
Once again, I'll comment too.
If that's true, then you have to.
Once again, there's rumors, and if you're a person that pays attention to rumors, you need to maybe check yourself. But if you don't hear from me, then hey, just keep it as hearsay. If anybody got a question,
would you like to put a name to that rumor?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure, John Duquette.
John Duquette. Hey, that's not the case. Everybody be evaluating. Everybody deserves a chance to be evaluated. That's just like any sport. any sport and any coach, anytime you have a coach, everybody's evaluated at the end of the year. If they meet the criteria, so be it. If they win the national championship, so be it. If they don't, so be it.
So as U.S. President, would you feel like you've been undercut and had your legs cut out, that someone
No, I don't feel undercut at all.
Above your head to threaten your head coach with an ultimatum of win or
nobody has given ultimatums. Nobody has threatened anybody.
Are you sure about
that? It's just a part of the game. All right, you win, and you keep going. That's every sport.
So you can
is there any sport in the world that you know to where if you lose, you still continue to get your job? That's anything in life. If you're working at McDonald's, if you don't do a good job, are you going to be working at McDonald's still? No, you're not. If you're working at Chrysler and you're doing a bad job, are you going to still be working at Chrysler? That's life. That's what happens.
So U.S. President are you saying that those allegations were never sent to Mr.
Allegations? Listen, man, this is sports.
No, I'm not asking
care about winning.
Mr. Robinson, I'm asking the question. About? Has those allegations and that statement been made from Mr. Zucchett to Mr. Leon?
From me?
No, I'm asking.
From my knowledge, I have no knowledge of it.
Okay, well,
but what I'm saying is this. Any sport or anything you do in the world, if there's not production, there's change. If you're not used to that, that's your life. I come from a winning creed. I'm cut from a winning cloth. If you don't produce and whatever it may be, there's always repercussions. That's life. Maybe you need to bring your standard up like that, and then you will live a good life. That's the standard. Right, production.
We'll end
it with that, production.
We'll end the questions with coaches there. We'll bring players up now.
There it is. Interesting stuff out of Windsor today. And John, I will ask you for your opinion on the matter. If you were in the position, would you be looking to move on and make a change with the head coach if your team was on the cusp of greatness for a few years and just could not get over the hump?
Absolutely not. This program went through some real dark period in the last 5 years financially, and they were on life support for the last couple of years. And the guys like Mike Lachance, the head coach, and the last couple of years, Mike Morency, former head coach of the University of Windsor Lancers, who is now the defensive coordinator. It's guys like that have kept the program alive, and I don't think you don't send a good message to your personnel and to your players when you're ready to throw your head coach under the bus. The one who kept this program on life support as long as they have.
Now, the immediate thing that popped into my head, and it's a little bit different because it is professional football, but last season the Chicago Bears, they fired their head coach, Lovie Smith, after a 10-6 season. They missed the playoffs, and it's actually how Mark Trestman, the former Montreal coach, got his job there. But we're in a competitive conference, and after years of showing like they made it to one Super Bowl, they lost. And they felt it was time for a change. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Winter there. And now, John, before we let you go tonight, I just want to talk quickly about the big upset of the weekend in Ottawa, and that was the Sooners knocking off the previously unbeaten and the number one overall team in Canada, the Hamilton Hurricanes. Now, Ottawa has been a competitive team season. They got their first victory prior to this game, but before that they had played three other top teams in the conference, and they played them pretty tough. They held their own. They were at home, so how surprising was it for you to see Ottawa pull out the win against Hamilton?
Well, a little bit, I discussed the Ottawa team with head coach Mike Lachance of the Windsor AKO Frat, and he said that he thought the Ottawa Sooners were one of the toughest teams that they've played all season. They were able to go up to Ottawa and win. So looking at the score and looking at how it was a back-and-forth game right from the start, I'm a little shocked that Hamilton may have gone up there looking ahead to seeing that their record was not the greatest. But, Ottawa's great. They got some great athletes, and they got a great coaching staff. And in this conference, there's so many balanced teams. I don't think it's a shock that Hamilton lost, being the number one team in the country. It's the second time this year that I can recall that the number one team has gone down with Saskatoon Hilltops. So is it a shock that they went down? No. Is it a shock the way they went down? No. I just think there's a lot of parity in this league, and when the push comes to shove at the end of the season, I expect the AKO Fratman, the Ottawa Sooners, the Hamilton Hurricanes, and the St. Leonard Cardinals to make the playoffs. And if Ottawa does squeak into the playoffs with the 4 seed, they can do some real damage. There's a lot of talent on that team. Like I said, I like their coaching staff. There's a lot of good football people. They got great support up in the Ottawa region for their junior team. So, Tyler, I'm not shocked at all. There's a lot of good teams in this league. There's a lot of good football players in this country, and it was on display Saturday up at Keith Harris Stadium in Ottawa.
He is a reporter for us here at Rouge Radio. He goes by the name of John DeNapoli. You can follow him on Twitter for more at John_DeNapoli. That's JOHN_DENAPOLI. John, thanks for coming on the program tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Tyler. Best of luck. Thank you.
There he is, John DeNapoli. Good stuff from him. And we're going to keep it rolling tonight as we welcome in our next guest. You know him well. I know him well. Everybody knows him well. He is Kent Ridley of Ridley Scouting, RidleyScouting.com, at Ridley Scouting on Twitter, various other projects. Kent, how are you doing this evening?
Oh, doing good here. Having a good time catching up on some CJFL action. I'm glad that you got a great interview there to lead in.
All right, so the CFL has decided it's time for a change with the draft format, and it was announced recently what exactly that change is. And so going forward, redshirt juniors in the NCAA, they're not going to be eligible for the draft, and they must complete their senior season prior to entering the draft. And Kent, if you can explain to our listeners who may not know what a redshirt junior is and how a player winds up being redshirted.
Basically, a lot of your redshirt players, when the NCAA teams are bringing in such large recruiting classes, they're bringing in between 20 and 25 kids a year, and really they don't have necessarily that many spots to plug them in right away. And so to counteract that, they can save their eligibility by taking them and giving them a red shirt designation, and what that does is it saves them a year of playing time, so that they can tack that on at the end. The NCAA rules allow you four playing years in a 5-year period in Division I, and then the rules are a little bit different as you drop down. But the key to it is you've got those 5 years, and so one of those years you could take off where you could practice with the team, kind of get up to speed with where they're at, or in some cases, if you have to transfer. If you're transferring from one school to another, you have to take a year off. And one of the things with the transfer is a lot of times going from one system to another, that year off is going to help you. And so it's a nice way to kind of eliminate some of the guesswork with these players that still have another year of NCAA action prior to they have to make the decision on the American side about going pro. And I think it would change some picks. Like your Danny Watkins, for example. I think that might have been a situation, if they had another year to think about it, that maybe they wouldn't have selected him in BC.
So moving back to the CIS among all of this, and previously you were not eligible to be drafted until you had completed your 4th year. Now players will be eligible 3 years upon completing their freshman season, and essentially the new rules have sort of led to a swap between the two leagues. And Ken, I know you definitely have some thoughts on the rule changes, so what do you like good and or bad of the change?
For me, the bad part of it is the wording of the rule. It took me several times of reading and talking with some other people to kind of get the gist of what they were trying to say. They should have just made it, a straightforward scenario, and instead, just how they worded it. I guess if I had any requests, I would send them back to the drawing board about how they wrote up that paragraph. So the kind of what it is for CIS players, you're eligible now after your 4th year, very similar to how it was before. But what they've done is they've created kind of a red shirt year for the CIS kids. So if you're coming into a CIS program, say out of high school, and they're really deep in your position, Especially this applies with quarterbacks, sometimes even with kickers. When they've got a guy that's going to be there for a couple years, and you're kind of playing that game about, when am I going to use this? If you're a head coach, you've got this talent, when are you going to finally need to make that replacement? The nice thing is that now they can redshirt that player and then bring him on for the next 4 years before he gets drafted into the CFL. So that's kind of good. I would definitely change the wording. I was kind of hoping that at some point when they did make a change to the draft rules, that they would figure out a way to kind of involve the juniors in some way beyond just being a territorial exemption.
So last week, sticking with the draft theme and the CIS here, the CFL Scouting Bureau released its top 15 rankings for May's draft, and rounding out at the top was McGill offensive lineman Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, and interestingly, he is a converted defensive lineman, and I wanted to ask you, Kent, does that make him possibly more valuable a little bit, knowing that in a potential emergency he can also play along the defensive line?
It does increase his value, especially since being a player that's played at a high level on the other side of the line. You also have that sense, what they're going to do a little bit more. You've had coaching to a higher level. He was kind of a surprise for me to see him at the top of the list. I had heard from somewhere, and I couldn't find it online here today when I was looking for it, but I had heard previously that he was looking at potentially entering med school, and so I thought that would kind of keep teams, a little bit wary about it. Now that being said, the CFL Scouting Bureau lists at the best of times, especially in September, have been known to have a few red herrings sitting at the top, and teams are, kind of maybe perhaps faking an interest in a player to draw the attention away from the player that they really want. And with that in mind, it's really interesting when I look at players that are down at number 6 and number 7 in Max Caron and Bo Landry. Both of those linebackers are guys that I project to have a good long run at the next level.
So running over the rest of the top 15 here quickly, number 2 was Devin Bailey, a receiver at St. FX. 3 was David Foucault, offensive lineman of Montreal. 4, Pierre Lavertu, an offensive lineman of Laval. Sticking with the Laval, at number 5 was Adam Thibault, a defensive back. 6, Bo, as you just mentioned, a linebacker at a, and following right up behind him. 7 is Max Caron, a linebacker at a Concordia. 8, Andrew Liu, defensive back at a Queens, and then we get on a roll of Queens here. As 9 is Sam Sabrin, a linebacker. 10, Derek Wigan, a defensive linebacker. 3 of the guys from Queens. 11, Christian Batchin, a receiver at a Concordia. 12, a from receiver out of the University of Saskatchewan Huskies. 14, Josh Burns, a defensive back from Windsor, and 15, Matthias Goosen, an offensive lineman out of Simon Fraser. So you talked a little bit about it, Kent, and just further possibly expanding on that, is there anything that stands out to you on the list, and any changes that you would perhaps make in terms of maybe leaving a player off, seeing a player added in, or whether it's dropping a guy in the rankings? What sort of changes would you have made?
Definitely, Goosen is a player that I expect to rise in those rankings over the course of the year. He's a player that I thought highly of coming out of high school, and I think that'll continue. Moving on from there, it's interesting to see Adam Thibault in there at number 5 as a converted wide receiver. He hasn't played a lot of defensive back, and to see him listed as a defensive back, I guess that's kind of what they're projecting for his future to end up there. But he's definitely going to be he's a very talented individual with a great skill set, and I expect big things out of him, heading towards evaluation camp this year. And so really there isn't anybody, necessarily missing. There was kind of a lack of Canada West players, and kind of expected to see maybe a Kit Hillis out of Saskatchewan on that list. Maybe an Aaron Pinkton, offensive lineman out of Regina. A couple of these guys, maybe that perhaps maybe have been overlooked a little bit, and we'll see getting towards December when the next group comes out, if any of those guys show up.
So as you mentioned, the next rankings are released in December, and of course the final rankings are released just prior to the draft in April. So with the draft format change and the things it brings, if we trace it back to 2013 for a second, and the top overall prospect in those rankings, the last rankings released prior to the 2013 draft, was Boseko Lakumbo. He's a linebacker out of Oregon. He would not have been eligible for the draft last year if rule changes were in effect. He would have been eligible this year. And so, Kent, would he still have topped the charts in terms of being the top overall prospect, even if he was moved up back a year to 2014 here?
That's a good question. I really think that he probably would have. Maybe some of that doubt, depending on where people thought his NFL status is going to lie. Maybe more of that would have crept in and dropped him down a little bit. At this point, I believe he's still listed as being kind of an outsider looking in at the NFL draft. And so in the September rankings, if he had been available for those, I'm fairly confident that we would have seen him top 3, if not sitting at the very top.
So as far as the other first-round draftees that went in 2013 that wouldn't have normally been eligible until 2014 under the new rule changes, that would be Hunter Stewart, Brander Craighead, and Nolan McMillan. Do you think that they would also slot in somewhere in the top 15 here?
I think when you've got talented offensive linemen like that they would definitely draw a lot of interest. That's pretty much 3 big bodies with a lot of training, with an extra year of NCAA training under their belt. Does that make them a little bit more inclined for one of these coaches to kind of look at them as being a immediate needs helper, or does it still keep them as kind of a project, making that adjustment to the CFL game? And so that's a good question in there. Brander Craighead was a guy that I was really high on going into last year, and that carried through for the whole year. I'm sure he would have been involved in this top 15. Nolan McMillan, I've always had kind of hesitations with him because of some injury issues, but with a clean bill of health, he's definitely a top 15 talent. And then when you take a look at Hunter Stewart, kind of the road less traveled going from Virginia to Liberty. He is a guy that I think, depending on the franchise, would kind of showcase his value. For me, I was pretty high on him, following him from high school to prep school and the whole way. But not everybody was, as far as I understand. And he's another individual that's switched over to the defensive line and back to the offensive line. And since he's been back as an offensive tackle at Liberty, he hasn't missed a start. And so he's definitely a guy who, out of those 3, maybe he's the one that's not on the top 15. But if the list was a little longer, he's going to show up.
So getting back into the on-field product here as it relates to the 2013 CIS football season, earlier today, as always on Tuesdays, the top 10 was released, and rounding out the charts once again was Laval Rouge, and following up behind them, Western from number 3 to number 2, Queens dropped from 2 to 3, Montreal stayed put at number 4, as did Calgary at number 5. Guelph and Saskatchewan switched spots. Guelph moved up from 7 to 6. Saskatchewan dropped from 6 to 7. Manitoba stayed at 8, as did McMaster at 9. And the unranked Bishops Gators moved up into the top 10 with St. FX, McGill, Regina, St. Mary's, and Windsor receiving other votes. And Kent, you sent me what I think is a fairly interesting idea here, and you are a voter in terms of the CS Football Top 10, and you sent me your new formula, and I had a chance to look at it, and it's quite interesting. So if you can explain to our listeners the basis of the formula that you have here.
Okay, well, basically, I created two kind of metrics to kind of look at it. The last 2 weeks, I've had a terrible time picking who's going to be number 10, and this week it was who's going to be number 9 and who's going to be number 10, and so I'm trying to figure out a way to kind of clarify that, at least for me, and come up with a little bit better system. So out of that came two formulas, and as you know, I've kind of turned it into a little bit of a Moneyball type football mind, thinking about things in terms of a formula, trying to take the bias out of it, and come up with a way that's, got a couple more reasons than just, I think they should be there. And so what I did is I took results from the schedule so far. Now, it does kind of hamper the AUS teams right now because they've only played 2 games, while Ontario schools have played 4. But basically, the assumption in university sports is that you're going to win your home game. And so I created a formula that took your home games and gave you a set number of points, but then gave you additional points for winning on the road. And in a like manner system, if you're supposed to win your home games, then you're supposed to lose your road games, and then gave you or docked you more points for losing at home compared to losing on the road. And so out of that system, I came up with Western sitting on top of my rankings. And so I thought that was fine and good, but I should take it a little bit farther in. And so then I took it and added in some factors like the margin of victory. And so then when you've got a Western team that has won 4 games this year, and they've won all 4 games by over 25 points, it kind of gave them bonus points for being, absolutely dominant in the games that they were in, compared to a team, like Bishops with a 2-1 record, but the 2 games that they won by a single point, and the game that they lost by over 25. So trying to create something here that kind of gives a feasible number that you can kind of work with. In the end, Western ended up on top of both of my charts. The one including the margin of victory ended up looking very similar, actually, to what the official top 10 was, until you got down to the bottom half of it. And so on that chart, I ended up with St. Francis Xavier coming in at 7, McGill at 8, Saskatchewan 9, and Manitoba 10, with Bishops a very close 11. And so that, with McMaster was on the official chart, they're sitting in 9th right now. Saskatchewan was 7th, Manitoba 8, McMaster 9, and Bishops 10. And so it kind of bumped down McMaster based on their two losses, being a 2-2 team. Their 2 losses were by one close one and one by a large difference. And that's kind of what happens when you get going in some of those games. But kind of the next step is going to be to take the margin of victory and then put a home and away slant onto that, and try to see who is dominant and where they're dominant. Western has been fantastic the whole season, and they're sitting at the top of my chart now, with 4 very dominant wins.
So wrapping things up here before we let you go, this upcoming weekend there are 3 games between teams ranked in the official top 10 rankings. And first on Friday, it's the number 8 Manitoba Bisons at the number 5 Calgary Dinos. Moving to Saturday, it will be number 9, the McMaster Marauders at number 6, the Guelph Griffins. And then on Sunday, the big one, the anticipated battle between the number 4 Montreal Caribbeans and the number 1 team in Canada, the Val Rouge. And Kent, just quickly, what do you expect to happen in these 3 games, and who are your winners?
My 3 winners in a quick fashion are going to be Laval, Guelph, and Calgary. Those are, if you want to go with that. I think Calgary's going to kind of prove this will be their big test of the year for sure, to prove kind of where they're sitting. But I think that they'll take that one. For Laval, they haven't been, the dominant Laval of previous years, and I think this will kind of be their big test. So it'll be kind of the moment where we go, is Laval really, Laval, the Laval we all know, or are they really beatable this year? And same with Montreal. Montreal has kind of survived off of their defense here this year, and we'll see if their offense can put up anything against that Laval defense.
All right, great stuff as always. Kent Ridley of RidleyScouting.com. Follow him at Ridley Scouting on Twitter. Kent, thank you very much for being a part of the program once again. You're great as always, and you have yourself a good night.
You too. Thanks for having me on, Tyler.
All right, Kent Ridley, John DeNapoli, CIS, CJFL. Good stuff as always here on Rouge Radio. Good evening, Canada. How are you doing out there? My name is Tyler Bieber, the host of Rouge Radio, and tonight it is, of course, Wednesday, and that means our CFL show. And coming up in a little bit here, we have the president of the CFL Players Association, Mike Morreale, and we're going to talk to him about a few things. He played for the Toronto Argonauts and the Hamilton Tiger Cats throughout his career, and he spent 12 years playing with those 2 teams, and so he was on both sides of a rivalry that has seen a lot go on over the course of their existence in the Canadian Football League. And so we'll ask him how it felt. How did it feel to play on both sides of that rivalry? Is there any sort of story that sticks out in his mind from that time? Of course, being the CFLPA president, there's much going on about Simeon Rotier, Ed Hervey, the Edmonton Eskimos, Chris Williams, and the Hamilton Tiger Cats coming up at the end of this season. The collective bargaining agreement is expired, and so the CFL and the Players Association are going to have to come to an agreement for 2014 and going forward. And of course, a recap of the week that was in the CFL this past week. The BC Lions getting back into the win column after defeating the Montreal Alouettes, who had a little bit of trouble with the quarterback situation. Tanner Marsh is injured, so Josh Nieswander is going to start this upcoming weekend here. And in that game, Nieswander threw 2 interceptions. He tried to maybe force it a little bit, try to get something going for that Montreal Alouettes team, and it just didn't happen. Travis Lulay, on the other hand, threw 3 interceptions in the game. He had his moments, and then, of course, towards the end of the game, he was injured, scrambling for a touchdown, and he has a shoulder injury, and he's going to miss at least 2 games. And so the team brought back Joey Elliott, who they released not too long ago, and so it'll be Elliott, the 3rd-string quarterback. Of course, they traded for Buck Pierce not too long ago from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and so he is the backup quarterback. And Thomas DeMarco is going to start his first career game for the BC Lions on Sunday afternoon when they are in Regina to take on the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Speaking of those Saskatchewan Roughriders, they also are going to be missing one of their stars as Corey Sheets was injured in the loss to the Toronto Argonauts, and Corey Sheets will miss this game against the Lions. He may miss one or more as well. It's not quite defined in that regard yet. In that game, Darian Durant threw 49 passes, an unusually high amount for him. I believe it was the second most pass attempts of his career. And when that's happening, as good as Darian Durant may be in a game, that's usually not a good thing for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Neil Hughes, who replaced Corey Sheets in the game, carried the ball 6 times for 14 yards. And while he was effective on passing plays, they just did not have that established ground game that you saw from the Riders, and they used so well over the course of the first half of the season in winning those games. On the other side, you had Zach Collaros. He picked up another victory for the Toronto Argonauts, and the Toronto Argonauts have made some ground without Ricky Ray. They're doing quite well for themselves, and how about that comeback? We'll discuss that a little bit later on. A 19-point fourth quarter for the Toronto Argonauts in defeating the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Of course, a rematch coming up on Friday this week, the Edmonton Eskimos and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in Winnipeg. I will be at that game covering it here for Rouge Radio, as well as CFLDaily.ca and on Twitter, of course. And the Edmonton Eskimos did defeat the Winnipeg Blue Bombers 25-7 in that game. Mike Riley threw 3 touchdowns in the victory on 16 completions, 25 attempts, 196 yards. And how about Adarius Bowman? Back and looking not too bad for the Edmonton Eskimos either, as he had 7 receptions for 88 yards and 1 touchdown in that game for the Edmonton Eskimos. On the other side, Justin Goltz. What do you say about Justin Goltz? Another performance that did not go exactly the way the Winnipeg Blue Bombers had intended. 5 completions, 10 attempts for 54 yards and 1 interception in that game. He was replaced in the second half by Max Hall, who threw 15 completions on 22 attempts for 160 yards and 1 interception. But still, through this season, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have yet to find the right chemistry between their quarterbacks and the offensive system, as well as the receivers that they are throwing to. But, I think they're starting to find maybe a little bit of ground there if they can continue establishing their ground game. They've got Aaron Kelly. He's doing well for them. If Clarence Denmark can step up a little bit, you, of course, have Terrence Edwards, the veteran there. And coming into the lineup for this weekend against the Edmonton Eskimos is Akeem Foster, who they acquired from the British Columbia Lions in exchange for Buck Pierce not too long ago. Moving on, the other game, of course, in the week was the Calgary Stampeders defeating the Hamilton Tiger Cats, as Henry Burris was back in Calgary once again. And not too bad of a performance by the Hamilton Tiger Cats on the road, but ultimately they could not hang on against the Calgary Stampeders, as the Stampeders scored 10 points in the fourth quarter en route to victory. Bo Levi Mitchell picked up another win. He had 20 completions on 30 pass attempts for 257 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Burris himself also had 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, but he threw for 408 yards on 26 completions. And how about CJ Gable starting to establish himself in that Hamilton Tiger Cats offense? For the longest time this season, they had no ground game, and while they're still not running the ball a ton, they're at least running the ball effectively, as CJ Gable had 9 carries for 53 yards and a touchdown, but he was much more effective out of the backfield receiving the ball from Henry Burris. And as I was mentioning, CJ Gable, he's come into his own here as the season wears on, and many have thought throughout the entire season, and I'm sure still believe, that Greg Ellingson, the receiver there, is the leading candidate for Rookie of the Year. But CJ Gable quickly closing the gap on his teammate Greg Ellingson, and it'll be interesting to see going forward with a competitive team, a competitive schedule coming up for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, which player is going to overtake one another and get that nod for the team, and I would think likely the East nomination for Rookie of the Year. And when you talk about Rookie of the Year, on the flip side of that, perhaps you bring in Brett Jones, the standout center for the Calgary Stampeders in his first season out of the University of Regina Rams program, and he has done a nice job for the Calgary Stampeders, bringing consistency to that offensive line. Of course, they are without Dimitri Sumpas for the rest of the season, and so it's a little bit of a tough added on pressure for Brett Jones, but he has seemed to pick that up quite well. John Cornish, of course, the running back there, and he has benefited from an offensive line there that has protected him quite well. The Edmonton Eskimos, so Friday is the rematch, and it'll be interesting to see if they can ride what they had found against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They started that game out well last week. They were up 24-3 at the half, but then they sputtered. They only scored 1 point in that second half, and that was in the fourth quarter. Of course, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers themselves were only able to come away with 2 field goals in the game, as well as a single courtesy of Sandro DeAngelis. But Mike Riley, you know, he continues to define logic maybe a little bit in terms of when you look around and you see quarterbacks in the past, such as Buck Pierce, and their ability to run the football and get hit and then go down. Riley himself, he's done it a lot this season. He has not missed a start yet, and he ran the ball 9 times in that game for 113 yards. And it'll be interesting to see how Casey Crehan and that Winnipeg Blue Bombers defense game plans for Mike Riley, knowing what just happened to them this past week. Now, the Bombers defense hasn't exactly responded too well to adjustments in games from week to week or in the game from the first half to the second half. So what do? Well, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is quarterback spies, and perhaps you use Enoch Mwamba in that regard, or else Jovan Johnson apparently will be playing safety this week. Maybe you use a little safety spy or something like that in order to effectively contain Mike Riley and keep him passing the ball, which I don't know if you even want to do that because the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have had troubles defending the pass all season long as well. And so, speaking of that Winnipeg Blue Bombers defense, Koshi Mwamba, of course, with Jovan Johnson moving to safety, he is dinged up and he will not play, or at least not start that game for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And offensively for the Blue Bombers, I believe it might be Max Hall starting at quarterback this upcoming Friday against the Eskimos. And so he has shown some flashes, but he hasn't been able to consistently put it together in the game. And we'll see what he's able to do for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Of course, my personal belief is Justin Gold is not really the answer there, as well as many others, but we will see. And perhaps, we might see Jason Boltis if things go wrong for Max Hall in this game. And Boltis, of course, is familiar with offensive coordinator Marcel Belfay from their time in Hamilton, along with receiver Aaron Kelly. And speaking of receivers, Akeem Foster, as I mentioned, traded from the BC Lions to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in exchange for Buck Pierce not too long ago. I think they can use him quite well in that offense. I think he can take on a role similar to that of Aaron Kelly, and that's being a big-time target and a big-time receiver making the big plays. I believe Aaron Kelly has averaged close to 20 yards of reception so far with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and although he hasn't made a ton of catches, his catches have been, the big play variety and has helped the Winnipeg Blue Bombers move the offense when they seem to be stuck. And the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, they were one team, the Toronto Argonauts the other team, that beat the Saskatchewan Roughriders. They are on a 2-game losing streak here. And so they're limping into a game against the BC Lions. Now, the BC Lions, on the other hand, despite coming off of a win against the Montreal Alouettes, are also sort of limping into the game with Travis Lulay injured and out for 2 weeks. Thomas DeMarco will get the start. Now, if you roll back the clock a little bit, when Buck Pierce was last with the BC Lions, he started a game against the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and he actually won that game against the Riders. And if Thomas DeMarco can follow that same path, what a break for the BC Lions, because this is such a critical part of their schedule. They're 1 game back of the Saskatchewan Roughriders for second place. And so if Thomas DeMarco can step in and make the big impact that he needs to make to get the BC Lions a win, all the more power to Thomas DeMarco and to the BC Lions for continuing to win within that division despite Travis Lulay's disappearance for the next 2 weeks. And obviously the big part of the BC Lions attack going forward here is going to be Andrew Harris. They gave him the ball for 13 carries in the win over Montreal. I still don't think that's enough, but I think that his comments perhaps to the media when he said that he doesn't know if the coaches have the confidence in him, I think you started to see a little bit more confidence perhaps, and the coaches realizing that, hey, yeah, we do need to involve Andrew Harris in this offense because he is a game breaker in the Canadian Football League. And so as I have been a believer of with Andrew Harris, you need to get him the ball through the air. And I mean, you can kind of compare it to what CJ Gable did for the Hamilton Tiger Cats with his 6 receptions and 100 yards. And we've actually seen that a little bit more this season with the running backs on other teams. So I think you need to see that happen with the BC Lions, and Jacques Chapdelaine needs to get that going for BC in order to A, help out a young quarterback making his first start in the Canadian Football League in Thomas DeMarco, and B, help what is going to be a fairly hyped up Saskatchewan Roughriders team coming off 2 straight losses here to East Division opponents, and they need to realize, and I'm sure they do realize, that this is it for them. They need to get on a roll now because Calgary is 1 game up on them and the BC Lions are right on their doorstep, and if they do go down to the BC Lions on Sunday afternoon, they will be behind the BC Lions in the standings by virtue of a head-to-head tiebreaker being their first meeting of the season. And how about Geroy Simon? I was a part of the teleconference earlier today. I listened into that with Geroy Simon in Regina with the media, and some interesting comments from Geroy Simon in terms of the game. He mentioned that the game itself against the Lions, it's just another game, and I think, I don't know, I think it's a little bit of just speak from Geroy Simon, being that he's playing his first game. He doesn't want to make a huge deal out of it and just, stay the course of what you're supposed to say and keep that straight. But he said he was excited for the week, but he has to treat it as any other game against these BC Lions. And then he was asked about his play and his role in the offense, and he does admit that he thinks he would be more productive if he was given the opportunity. And we've seen him step in as a blocker, and that's just something that you don't see at a Geroy Simon. And I do think the Saskatchewan Roughriders offense does need to use Geroy Simon a little bit better and a little bit more, because he brings that extra added factor to that offense. And especially last week, I think you saw a little bit of it with Weston Dressler out, and they needed to rely on him perhaps a little bit more. But going forward and heading towards November, Geroy Simon needs to be a big part of that passing attack. And continuing on with Geroy Simon, he says that it's all about football in Regina. It's not like Vancouver where they have the Vancouver Canucks or a whole bunch of other stuff, the nightlife, that type of thing. He says that he wanted to play in a place where football is king. And that may seem like he's just saying that just for no reason, but what ended up happening in BC was Geroy was either going to have to take a pay cut or he was going to be gone. And so he was gone, and he wanted to play in a place where football is king. And that, of course, meant the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and obviously that was the case, and that happened. And in terms of the record, Ben Cahoon, he says that he and Ben Cahoon are pretty good friends, and he considers him a great friend, and he hasn't thought a ton about the record. But he knew the time would come eventually in terms of having the chance to break the record. And he mentioned that it was a funny game, how the opportunity to break the record comes against the BC Lions. And then if he doesn't get the record this Sunday, the next game is against the Montreal Alouettes. And so he can break it either against the Lions, his former team, or against the Alouettes, who Cahoon played for in the Canadian Football League. And even then, if it doesn't happen that week, then he returns to Vancouver for the first time to play the BC Lions. So he's going to break it, the receptions record, against a team he's familiar with, or at least a team that Ben Cahoon was familiar with in either the Montreal Alouettes or the BC Lions. And further speaking about leadership, he said, Geroy Simon mentioned that it happens over time. He's a longtime veteran in the league, and if young players come to him, he will offer them guidance. But of course, he also feels that if nobody comes to him, he will give his opinion when it is needed. And he says that the young BC receivers such as Nick Moore and Courtney Taylor, who have been compared to himself and Arlen Bruce, it's a little bit unfair to those guys, and that they have to make a name for themselves. And I mean, he's absolutely right, because Geroy Simon is the number one receiver, arguably the number one receiver. Of course, people will still think Bill Stiegel in that regard, but arguably the number one receiver in all time in the Canadian Football League. And Nick Moore is, of course, not going to get there. No offense to him, but that's just not the case. And then Courtney Taylor, again, Arlen Bruce, top 10 in yards and receptions, and you just can't compare them to those guys. And then finally, with Geroy Simon, he said that when he came up to the Canadian Football League and he started with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, he didn't know much about the CFL, and he didn't really think he would be the number one receiver of all time when all is said and done in terms of yards, receptions, the stats, and overall play. And he just wanted to play football, whether it was the CFL, whether it was the NFL, and he just wanted to play football. He wanted to get out there, and he wanted to make an impact. And has he ever over the course of his career? And he's not sure if he's going to speak with Cahoon when he breaks the record, but as I mentioned, he does consider him a great friend. And it'll be interesting to see if Geroy does break the record against the BC Lions here, or if it will be against the Montreal Alouettes. And so we're going to see if we can hook up with Mike Morreale here one more time. Just give me 1 second here. Mike, of course, played 12 seasons with the Toronto Argonauts and the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And so, Mike, how are you doing?
Not too bad. How you doing?
I'm doing quite well. Obviously, playing with the Toronto Argonauts and the Hamilton Tiger Cats, you know the rivalry quite well. You played on both sides. Now, this year, unfortunately, due to stadium unavailability, there was no Labor Day Classic, and so it took a little bit away from the rivalry. But I wanted to ask you, what's it like playing in the rivalry, and is there anything that stood out, either playing with Hamilton or playing with Toronto, that a story that maybe you have to share?
Well, I mean, playing that was, I mean, the rivalry in Southern Ontario, and still is. I mean, unfortunately, not the opportune time this year with the new stadium reconstruction and what have you. But it's one of those things, and I've been on both sides of it as well. So it's interesting for me to be able to, view the games as a Argonaut and as a Ticat. And I can tell you that if I had to compare the two, I would definitely say that the feeling, the importance, the real hype around the game really was stronger as a member of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I think it was just kind of as a Hamiltonian, the distaste for, the Toronto, everything about Toronto, and it's just the way that the fans were just geared up to say, we want to, make sure that the Ticats whip Toronto for more than just the reasons of what happens on the football field. And that's always kind of been, what makes the rivalry so special.
So, of course, this past season with the big story recently is with Simeon Rotier, Ed Hervey, and the Edmonton Eskimos. And I wanted to ask you if there's a certain process either going forward now or that you have used in the past with the CFLPA in terms of listening to comments from executives or coaches to ensure that the players are and their reputation is being held to the certain standard that it should be, and that they aren't being thrown under the bus as we saw with Ed Hervey a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, that caught us by surprise, obviously. It has happened in the past, not specifically at that level, but there have been instances where we've raised, some objection to some of the comments that have been said, and they've generally been dealt with internally by the league, and we keep a pretty open ear of open line of communication to figure what's going on. In this case here, some of the lines got crossed, and we, obviously what happened, and certainly it was something where as an association and, players, they don't want to be mistreated, and, we had to have a chat with Ed, and the league did as well, and certainly it was something that just doesn't look good on the league. So, in the end, I think everything has been settled. I don't think there'll be any further issues that would arise that were quite similar as that, and hopefully not for anybody for that matter. It's just not good for anyone. It's a bit of a black eye. And we do have and I personally have a good relationship with the league, and sometimes our communication lines get crossed. In that case, or in this case in particular, they seem to not be as clear as they should have been, and unfortunately, we had to make a bit of a public statement just to clear the air on our point of view.
So when does it become the CFLPA's business to step in with something like this? Is it when the player's name is mentioned directly, or could it be as simple as the executive or the coach has pretty much all but identified the player's name, and you kind of have a general feeling of, and the player themselves have a general feeling of what's happening? So when does it become the CFLPA's business?
Well, I think any time it involves a player, certainly it's our business, and more often than not, the league will, look out for the interests of the association and the player also. That's generally what happens. But there are going to be instances where things fall through the cracks, or they're not, dealt with as easily as other things. It's our job as an association to make sure the players are treated equally fairly and what have you, and everyone abides by the rules of the collective bargaining agreement. And, oftentimes we have to do stuff behind closed doors. This, unfortunately, was out in the public, but it was out in the public, I think, for a reason, create awareness and to make sure it never happened again.
So you obviously played for 12 years in the league, and you mentioned that it has happened in the past. Is there anything that maybe you could share with us that happened during your playing days when you as a player maybe heard about something on your team that a coach or an executive made out publicly, or if it was more closed and behind the doors?
Yeah, I think, I think the answer is the latter. Generally, 99.9% of it happens behind closed doors. And as a professional athlete, you're expected to live up to, you're paid to do a job, and you expect to live up to the ramifications if you don't do your job. But for the most part, that's done privately and quietly. And so I don't know. I mean, I've heard many instances of comments, from management or coaches directly to players. But generally, it's been in a locker room setting where the public doesn't come into play. And that was probably the main difference. I think as athletes, we understand that, we're here to, paid to play a job, and we're subject to criticism. And for the most part, that usually happens behind the scenes.
So in regards to another player that has taken quite the spotlight in the past year this season, that would be Chris Williams, of course. Is the situation any closer to being complete? I mean, you guys have made your stance that he is a free agent, and it's still ongoing as to what exactly the case is. Is there a time frame that we can expect that this to be 100% officially resolved?
It's tough for me to comment on it because it is still ongoing. I can tell you that our position is just what you mentioned, that he is a free agent. But without getting into too many specifics, just because I can't, it really is, a situation that has been obviously troublesome because it's taken a lot of time and effort, and it's meant that, Chris isn't on the football field, and that hurts all CFL fans, of course. And ideally, I think it would have been nice to have him on the field and get a deal done and everybody move forward. But sports, as most people know, is a business too. And in this case, there was a situation came up and Chris needed assistance based on, what his position was. And as an association, we backed him. And it's still at a point now where it's still being discussed, so I can't really get into specifics, but other than to say that as an association, we do believe that he is a free agent at this time.
So in addition to all that has gone on so far this season and that will come up here going forward, the CBA expires after this season. And I was wondering if has there been any discussions thus far with the CFL in terms of a new agreement, or when would that start to occur?
we've definitely had informal discussions, so we haven't sat down with all the members of the player representative committee who basically act on behalf of the CFL. But I know that they have internally had discussions amongst their group, and we've obviously internally had discussions amongst our group, not only the executive but the player reps, and we've completed all the team visits with the exception of Hamilton, just based on our schedule, to meet with them to discuss the upcoming negotiations. So formally, there's not been any discussions. However, we have a very good open door policy with the league. I like to think that we are both on the same page, and we both have the clear goal in mind, and that is to play football next year in 2014 and be on that field in June. So it won't be easy, I'm sure, as we start to sit down and negotiate, and it's certainly we have a shared interest, and that's to continue the play.
So in regards to the new collective bargaining agreement, is there anything that you can maybe give us, maybe one or two things that the CFLPA would like to push for with the new CBA?
Unfortunately, I can't, because we haven't submitted our position, and we have a tradition and an agreement with the league that we're not going to publicly discuss it, without the kind of prior understanding, or not approval, but a discussion with the other party. So there's really nothing I can say publicly now prior to us doing something as an association, putting together a proposal to submit. So that's what we've been working on for some time now.
And one of the things that I have noticed either on Twitter or on other means of social media is that fans don't have much access to contract information. And I was wondering if maybe you had any insight into whether down the road that could be the case, where a fan could look on, I don't know if it would be the CFL website itself or where it would be, but if they would be able to find when a player is signed through, when his contract is going to expire, and perhaps what his salary is.
Right now, that has remained as private information. I mean, as private as we don't disclose it as an association. Certainly, agents are aware of it, league office is aware of it, teams are aware of it, and players are. But publicly, we don't disclose, and that's been at the request of the players. So they have requested that their salaries be kept private, and we respectfully, do what they ask us to do. That may change as we move forward. I don't know, but it's just been commonplace based on the players' own personal reasons that the salaries be kept confidential.
And then, Mike, last question before I let you go. How has your tenure been as president thus far? How have you enjoyed doing what you do?
Well, I mean, I have thoroughly enjoyed doing this. It's obviously a passion of mine, and the people I work for, the other executive members and all the player reps and all the players are just a treat to work with. And I enjoy going to work every day, and I thoroughly am excited about being part of, the negotiation process and to building not only what's fair for the players, but a better, CFL in the long run. And I believe that the league feels the same way, that collectively we're going to do what's best for both parties and for the fans and for all, everybody involved in the CFL. So it has been, a great second year as president, and hopefully many, many more. And obviously the important thing now is getting ready for upcoming negotiations and enjoying the rest of the season, the Great Cup, and taking it from there.
12-year veteran of the Toronto Argonauts and the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and currently the CFL Players Association president, Mike Morreale. Thank you so much for joining me.
Not a problem. I had a great time. Thank you.
I have a person sitting just down from me here. He is Darren Bombing, and he reports on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And Darren, I'm going to bring you in here now. And how are you doing?
I'm good.
I think you can provide some assistance with me here just fine. And so Friday, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, I don't know if we can keep saying that they're going to try and make the playoffs because it's looking a little bit bleak here. Right. But they're going to still try and win, and they're going to try and win another game here at Investors Group Field, looking for their second win in a row. What do you feel that they need to do to improve from their 25-7 loss to the Edmonton Eskimos last week in terms of getting better substance from their players moving forward here on Friday?
It's pretty obvious that the deficiencies in this team are on the offensive side of the football. It was a unique opportunity for a couple of the beat reporters that covered the football club today, as Kevin Cheveldayoff of the Winnipeg Jets, the general manager, was given a 2-year contract extension. So the majority of the media were down at MTS Center in downtown Winnipeg, and it left about 4 of us with Tim Burke. And we got a little bit more in-depth on a couple topics, and he kind of opened up a little bit more, and it was a little bit more of a personal conversation. And one of the things that he talked about is his defense. And he feels his defense, and we all know Tim Burke being the defensive guru that he is, and the reputation that he precedes him in the Canadian Football League when it comes to building excellent defenses. And he mentioned that his defense this year is average, that it's middle of the pack, and that in the past, you can look at the Winnipeg Blue Bombers back in 2011 when he was the defensive coordinator. It was the defense that really carried that club to the Grey Cup appearance in 2011. It definitely was not the offense. Buck Pierce had a decent year in 2011. He didn't do anything spectacular. They didn't have a fantastic rushing attack. The passing game was there when they needed it to be, and they were able to win that Eastern Final over the Hamilton Tiger Cats and get to that Grey Cup, and obviously eventually lose to the hometown BC Lions. But with a defense like they have this year in 2013, where it's average, where they allow opposing quarterbacks, I think the count this year, 5 opposing quarterbacks have been named Offensive Player of the week that they play the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. The defense continually allows quarterbacks to stretch the field, to make the big plays. They're essentially big play deficient. They're not able to stop opposing offenses from stretching the field and going down and picking up big chunks of yards at a time. The front 4 is excellent. They've done a great job kind of plugging and playing. When JT Gilmore was hurt, they put in Zach Anderson. He's proven to be a great addition to the inside. Brian Turner has done, I still think he's having a near all-star season. And then on the ends, obviously Alex Hall is, continuing to be a menace to opposing quarterbacks and able to rush off that left edge really well. But the defense as a whole, like I was, just to reiterate, they really allow the big play too much, and the pass defense is very poor. Koshi Mwamba is hurt right now. I believe it's an ankle injury. He will dress this week, but Javon Johnson is going to move from corner to safety, and backup cornerback, halfback Marty Marquette will now be the new starting cornerback. This changes a lot of things when it comes to the non-import status of their defensive starters. They're going to have to shuffle some things around. Jake Thomas might start at defensive tackle for Zach Anderson. You obviously want to leave Brian Turner in there. Pierre-Luc Labbé may move into middle linebacker spot, bumping Enoch Mwamba to the weak side linebacker spot. There's a couple things that they're going to have to do to maybe juggle to keep that non-import ratio where it needs to be for the game. But really, if this team wants to find success, the defense needs to play its best football. It needs to be beyond average, and the offense needs to protect the football. I think I've been very critical of Justin Goltz over the last couple months. I've really not liked what I've seen in him, really over the last 2-3 seasons that I've watched him in practice, and then finally got to see him in game action this year. But the quarterback needs to protect the football. When your offense is not putting up big points, you can't turn the ball over. And we've seen it in the Labor Day game against Saskatchewan. The 2 fourth-quarter interceptions that he threw really put the game out of reach for Winnipeg when they were, only down by 6 points with just a matter of minutes to go. And then obviously in the rematch, the rubber match at Investors Group Field, Winnipeg came out with the win in that game, but again, Justin Goltz fumbled late in the fourth quarter and allowed Saskatchewan to threaten again. So really with this team, no, the playoffs are a bit out of the picture. We actually had a chance to talk to Wade Miller, the new acting CEO and president of the football club, obviously a longtime member of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers as a linebacker and a fullback. And he said, we were talking about the press box and some of the workspace areas and what they're going to do if they host a playoff game. And he talked about it next year, and we all kind of had a giggle about it, but even the CEO knows that the playoffs are essentially out of the picture right now. Acting General Manager Kyle Walters is trying to manipulate and work with what he has right now. They've obviously moved on from the Buck Pierce era because they know if you're sitting at 2 wins in the season and you're in mid-September, things are pretty much out of reach. So at this point, they're working with what they have. And just to reiterate my points, the defense needs to continue to rush the quarterback, be strong there, not allow the big play, and then on offense, protect the football, try to move the ball. I think the passing game is not going to be effective really with any of the quarterbacks they have right now, and Chad Simpson with that troublesome foot still out of the lineup, so Will Ford hoping to build on. He's really looked better from one game to the next, so he'll enter his 3rd professional start this week.
So you mentioned quarterbacks, and of course Gary Crowton was fired earlier this season. He was replaced with Marcel Belfay. Now, nothing has seemed to change stats-wise in terms of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers quarterbacks. I mean, they haven't thrown a touchdown pass since Max Hall threw one in the first half against the Hamilton Tiger Cats in Week 8, and they still have yet to throw a second-half touchdown since Buck Pierce, who now plays for the BC Lions, in Week 1 against the Montreal Alouettes was the last time that a Bombers quarterback threw a touchdown pass in the second half. So one of the things I was critical about with Gary Crowton was his adjustments in game, and it doesn't seem to have made an impact with Marcel Belfay's offense in terms of moving forward in the second half. But I don't know if you would agree with me, but I think that there's at least progress with what Marcel Belfay has done, and perhaps now we're starting to realize that, in fact, it could be what they have to work with in terms of quarterbacks. It is what they have struggled with, and was it all Gary Crowton's fault, or is it still, again, back on Joe Mack a little bit?
Absolutely. I think when it comes to placing the blame on why this offense and really this team is struggling right now, it's funny how everything seems to kind of float to the surface once you weed out the problem. And the problem was Joe Mack. He was really trying to build this team like a general manager would if he wanted to build an NFL team for the future. He went very young. He went very skilled, and he didn't rely on veterans. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers, entering Week 1 this year, were the youngest team in the Canadian Football League by a very wide margin. And I think they had something like 1,000 less games of CFL experience among 53 or 55 roster players they had heading into Week 1 than the top teams in the league, like the BC Lions, or the most veteran teams in the league, like the BC Lions and the Montreal Alouettes. As far as the offense goes, I can say one thing. Marcel Belfay's offense is extremely different than the one Gary Crowton was putting together. It's hard to tell when you're watching the games on television because you can't see the whole field. You watch the quarterback drop back, you watch the running backs and the slot backs or tight ends that are close to the offensive line, but you don't really get to see what the receivers are doing downfield and how they're reacting to defenses. So one of the things that Marcel Belfay is trying to do is implement a CFL-style offense away from the one that Gary Crowton had, which was kind of, I use the term quite frequently. He was shoehorning an NFL-style offense into the CFL game. And with Marcel Belfay, like I said, very different offense, very more CFL-style offense, but it takes time. Really, he had no training camp, and he's trying to acclimate his players using the same nomenclature, the same vernacular, the same language. Nomenclature was Marcel Belfay's word when he talked about trying to implement his offense and keep the same language, the same names for plays, and those sorts of things that the players on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers offense were familiar with. So I think it's taking some time. Really, we've seen flashes when Max Hall has time to throw the football. He's able to make quick decisions and move the football down the field. When Justin Goltz plays smart and goes through his progression of receivers and uses the right side of the field that he wants to be putting the ball onto, the offense can move the ball. When the offensive line is healthy and Chad Simpson was healthy, they were able to run the football. But really the problem is Marcel Belfay comes in midseason. He even said it when he came in as an offensive consultant that he just wanted to be here and to help. And then when he was put into the position of being the offensive coordinator, he said, this is not an ideal situation. This is not something I wanted, but I did, he said that he agreed to contribute to this team and help in any way he could. And they put the offensive coordinator duties on his shoulders, and he's going with that and feeling that trying to work to be the offensive coordinator of this football team and try to help this offense. But it's really right now the offensive line is so extremely hurt. This football club signed 2 import offensive linemen just 2 days ago. And they're going to start this week because Paul Swiston is hurt, Shannon Boatman is hurt, Glenn January, who I think is maybe the most valuable piece on this offense if it came to trading some of this talent away. Glenn January, I think, is somebody who would be very sought after for a playoff team if they wanted to make a run for the Grey Cup, a very excellent tackle, and he's done a great job protecting that blind side of their right-handed throwing quarterbacks. So with all of these guys hurt, they've got Tyson Pencer in there. He made his first start of his professional career just last week against Edmonton. And with the offensive line so hurt, I think it is almost impossible for this offense to do any better than they have in the past. And really, you look at what they've done in the past, it's nearly nothing. So it's their battle is extremely uphill on a very rainy, wet, slippery slope.
TSN 1290 reporter here in Winnipeg. He is Darren Bombing. You can follow him on Twitter at Darren Bombing. Darren, thank you so much for stepping in here and joining me tonight.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks, Doc.
Darren Bombing, TSN 1290 reporter. That's about it for our CFL show. And thanks once again for listening to us here on Rouge Radio. We, of course, are back on Tuesday with the CIS and CJFL show. And definitely look forward to that. We'll recap the week that was in the CIS as well as the Canadian Junior Football League. And once again, a great set of games coming up here this week. As we were talking about with Darren Bombing, the rematch between the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and the Edmonton Eskimos should be great, as well as the other 3 games. Thanks once again for tuning in to Rouge Radio, and you have yourself a fantastic evening.